So, hi everybody. My name is Ben Loomer and I work at Learn, and I would like to welcome all of you to our webinar, Perspectives on Parenting. Today we're with Janna Gillis and Kirsten Greb from the Center for Excellence for Mental Health and the Lester B. Pearson School Board, and they're going to be talking to us about creating positive relationships with your children and maintaining them during difficult times. So just a quick note about the order of the presentation. We are going to have the two presenters talk about the topic, and then we will have time for questions afterwards. For those of us joining live, I invite you to type in the chat box any questions you might have. As well, we have questions that were submitted ahead of time, and we will do our best to answer all of those questions. So without further ado, I would like to...
Ben, perhaps just remind people that it is being recorded.
Oh, sure. So we are recording this presentation because we've received a number of requests for people who aren't able to make it tonight. So at any point, we'll only see the people that are speaking. So since no one besides our presenters are talking, no one will be seen. And for people at home, hi. So with that, I'd like to pass the mic over to Kirsten and Janna. Go ahead, please. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben, and thank you for having us, and welcome everybody. So my name is Kirsten, and my colleague here with me is Janna. And yes, so we're talking about creating positive relationships with your children and maintaining them during difficult times. So just to go over quickly kind of what we will be talking about this evening. So we'll start with just kind of talking about this new reality that we have, like parenting in 2021 is very different than parenting 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, right? So we'll talk about that quickly. We'll look at how we respond to things or how we respond when things go well, balancing connection and skill building, how we respond when things are a bit more challenging, and then we'll have some time for questions and comments at the end as well. So parenting in 2021, a new reality. So like I said, before we dive into everything, we just want to take a minute to recognize how we are parenting in this new reality. It's very different from when we grew up, or from even when I grew up, right? When I was a child, I'd go home for lunch, somebody was home, I'd watch the Flintstones, and I'd go back to school. Not many of my friends, nobody was in daycare. A lot of people now, a lot of children are in daycare. We have more and more parents are both working, more activities than ever. There's more technology to compete with, homework, making supper. Our plates are full, right? And this was even before the pandemic hit. So now we have a pandemic. We have some parents that are working from home, trying to juggle parenting and work with everything else on our plates. And it is challenging and it's very difficult. We're parenting from this exhausted state where, and sometimes we just want to maybe even ourselves jump on our cell phone or our screen just to kind of disassociate, right? And regulate ourselves from our extremely busy days. But now all of this can have a huge impact on our relationships and how we are feeling. So despite all of these demands that we have, how do we maintain these positive relationships with one another when sometimes we just want to flop, right? When we're just exhausted. So part of it is important to understand how we are feeling in these new times as well. What is going on inside our minds? Because when we are not in a good place, if we're exhausted, drained, or stressed, or angry, we can internalize different behaviors more as well. Take things a bit more personally that we may not take in other circumstances. And ultimately, we can't parent well if we are not feeling good, right? So we need to recognize our own feelings and be mindful when we're at our own limit also. But we'll get into that a little bit later. For now, I'm going to pass it on to Janna, who's going to talk to you about getting the most out of our relationships.
Thanks, Kirsten. So that's the question, right? How do we get the most out of our relationships with our kids, and how do we foster, and build strong connections within our families? Well, there's some interesting research out of Penn State that I stumbled upon around this time last year, and it explores the importance of how we respond to those we care about when things are going well, right? So oftentimes the gauge of the quality of a relationship looks at how do we respond to those we love when they are in need. Okay, will you be there for me when I need you? When I'm in distress, when things aren't going well, how do you respond? Well, the folks at Penn State are finding that a stronger predictor of the quality of our relationships is how we respond and what we pay attention to with our loved ones when things are actually going well. So this comes from the work of Dr. Shelley Gable, and she suggests that, again, while it's important to be there for people, obviously, and respond well when things are tough, sometimes that's actually easier to do in certain ways, and that we need to pay closer attention to the way we respond to those we care about when things are going well, right? That the way we respond can really strengthen relationships and provide a sense of well-being and attunement for both people, or it can actually erode our relationship and drive disconnection. And for me, this was really interesting because my first thought was, it never really occurred to me that I should be paying attention to my responses to my kids when they are sharing something positive with me. I just thought, if they're sharing something positive, I must be giving back something positive in return. Next slide. So I'm going to explain more. Okay, so according to this idea of Dr. Shelley Gable's, there are 4 different ways in which we respond to others when they share something positive with us, but only one of those response styles actually serves to strengthen the relationship, and the other 3 actually can erode that connection. Okay, so if we respond, if you see the sort of the 3 chunked together on the right of the screen, if we respond by being a conversation hijacker, a conversation killer, or a joy thief, that is driving disconnection. And I'll explain those more in a moment. Okay. On the other hand, being a joy multiplier, okay, fosters closeness and connection. And when I looked at this at face value, I thought to myself, well, I'm obviously a joy multiplier, right? I'm pretty positive. I'm the glass is half full kind of gal. I love good news. Who doesn't? And connecting with people. Then I looked at these responses in more detail. So if you look at, next slide, what it is to be a conversation killer, okay? So your child or anyone, right? Your spouse, your friend comes to you to share something positive, right? They might say, hey, look what I made, or guess what, or mom, dad, did you know? And how do we kill conversations? Well, we kill them by our distractions, right? And we are a very, very distracted society right now. So our distractions and our disengagement. Right, so our child or our teen comes to share with us, which should first alert us, right, to the importance of this experience. They're coming to us to share this. It means that we represent something very important to that person. And are we giving our full attention, right? Can we put our phones down? Can we actually orient our bodies and our minds and our attention to this person with our whole selves? And that was interesting for me to think about, right? We've all been in situations where we are trying to communicate with someone who's not fully engaged. And what happens, right? It kills the conversation. And more importantly, it sends the message that I don't really have time for you, or I'm not really interested in what you have to say. The second way that we can erode with our responses, next slide, is to be a conversation hijacker. And simply put, this is when we just shift that light, right, and that focus onto ourselves. We put it off the other person and we shine it on ourselves. And we're not doing this to be jerks, and we're not doing this because we're narcissists, right? We often do this as a way to relate. Okay, often when someone else shares something positive, a positive experience, it highlights something similar, right, that we want to share. So it often comes from a good place. However, what it communicates is that we're not attuned to what the other person needs, and we end up making things about ourselves. And then the third way that we can erode in our response is by being a joy thief. And so our child or teen comes to us excited to share some positive news or some idea. And rather than sort of coming alongside of that person in a shared way, we instead, point out all the problems and the downsides and to this good news or this idea, which really sucks that positive emotion out of the other person. So I have to tell you, I read this and thought, as I was putting this content together when I first learned about it, I kid you not, I had an experience with my oldest child where not only did I engage in one of these, eroding ways of relating, but I actually managed to accomplish all 3 at once in about the span of 45 seconds. And it went like this. Working from home, my daughter gets home from school. At the time she's 10, and she says, Mommy, I have such a good idea. I've decided I'm going to make bracelets, okay? And I'm going to sell them online. And I know everything I need to do, and I have the little bags ready, and I'm going to make that happen. Well, the first thing I did was, I was super distracted, right? I wasn't in the place or in the presence to really give her my attention. If I recall, I was like rummaging through a closet or something, looking for something. So she didn't have my attention. And then the second thing I did was I got up and I turned to her and said, oof, Della, I don't know, like selling things online can get really complicated. I'm not sure that's such a good idea. Like, how are you going to collect money from people? Like, you have to set up a whole. And then I said, actually, what you should do is you should sell them at school. When I was a kid, I had this friend at school named Malcolm, and he sold Jolly Ranchers out of his locker, and he made a killing. And she looked at me deadpan and said, you know what? You took a really good idea I just had and you made it into something bad. And I thought, oh man, I did. And I'm actually looking at this material at the same time, right? So it really made me take pause and reflect on the way that I'm relating in maybe more situations than I really give, credit to. So if we look at what is that relationship, that actually produces a sense of connection and builds the relationship, it's the idea of being a joy multiplier, right? And really what we're doing here is we're mirroring a person's excitement and their positive energy, and we're connected to them, we're attuned to them, we're giving them, our undivided attention in this small moment, right? We can ask questions to help the person unpack that experience. But by doing this, both people feel more connected, and it strengthens the relationship and the trust and the communication. And it actually allows, both individuals to feel closer. So we want to be mindful of our response styles and think about ways in which we can tap into the style of responding more often, right? When we think about the way we interact with our kids or other important people in our lives, what is the dominant way that we respond to those people? I thought the majority of the time I was a joy multiplier, but I'm not so sure that that's what was happening, so this helped me to take a little bit of a look, and to ask myself, what gets in the way from me being authentically engaged with the other person. And I want to be really clear, we're not always going to be joy multipliers. It's just not how life works. Life will lead us to be distracted and not fully present. And sometimes those distractions are justified and they're just going to happen. And sometimes our excitement to share and connect will interrupt someone else's flow, right? And sometimes people's positive news or ideas, like my 6-year-old claiming she's going to walk the dog on her own, needs to be brought back into check. It's not going to happen, right? But the bottom line is being responsive in our relationships helps us to be stronger, helps us to be happier and more resilient. And it's not about, walking around as a cheerleader. It's really just about authentic engagement. Okay. Authentic engagement just requires us to sort of lean into the conversations and to give our presence to our kids. So within this idea of healthy attachment and building strong relationships with our kids, I think it's safe to say that this is a dance that we're always sort of engaging in, right? So how do we answer these bids for connection that our kids present to us while remaining sturdy when they push back? Because they will, and they do often. They'll push back and try to assert their own independence, which is really how, they learn the skills necessary to function in the world. And we're constantly trying to balance these two aspects, okay? It's really in our human nature to seek connection and closeness with others. I don't have to tell anybody here that. It's obvious. It's not something that we or our kids even put a ton of conscious thought to. It's really built in and it's necessary, right? At the same time that our kids seek connection and closeness with us, they also seek autonomy and they seek independence. And they want to act and make decisions in a way that allows them the freedom to stand on their own. And this is really important for our kids' development. They need, at the same time, our sturdy leadership, though, to make sure that they're doing this in a safe way, in an age-appropriate way. This is how our kids learn the skills necessary to function in the world. And if you remember, maybe you have, little kids right now, maybe you have teenagers, but remember when your child was or is, a 2-year-old holding out their arms to be picked up and cuddled one moment, and then they reject your hand and insist on crossing the street alone, right? So this is the pull. And this is the balance that we and our kids are striving to figure out, right? This desire for connection coupled with autonomy, which allows them to build their skills and independence. It's constantly at play, and it's regardless of the age. So next slide. So a bid to connect is really just an attempt to get attention, affection, or acceptance. So it could sound really clear, like, will you play with me? Or can we chat? Those are obvious bids for connection, right? It's clear what the ask is, but not all bids for connection or closeness are so clear, right? And in fact, sometimes they feel like the opposite, that our kids are actually looking to push us away or trying to even incite us. So we need to be on the lookout for behaviors or actions that are not very pleasant, but are actually bids for closeness and connection. And this will help us to respond in more productive ways. So for example, a snarky comment from your teen, that, you won't be home for supper might actually be them communicating that they wish that you would be there, right? Or your child melting down on the kitchen floor after work and school, while you're cooking and trying to get supper on the table, they might actually be saying, I was gone from you all day and I need you right now. So how should we respond if a child is making a bid for us, but in a negative way, right? Through snarky comments or tantrums or pushback. And I think for many of us as parents, we've been told to respond with consequences so as to not reinforce poor behavior, right? But I think sometimes if we can think that children are often doing the best they can in that moment, right, to get their needs met. And more often than not, it is a bid for our attention, our affection, or acceptance. And we just have to be able to see through the noise sometimes and redirect the need, right? In these moments, we need to be stronger and wiser than them, right? So no matter if the bid comes from, a sweet place of let's play, or if it's, snarky words or a tantrum, the message is often the same. The message that they're really trying to convey is notice me, show me I matter, be with me. So by giving this sort of measured, patient response, not always easy, of course, to the bid, no matter in what form it comes from, we actually are filling our child's emotional bank, and building that connection. And a kid has that emotional bank filled up is less likely to make, bids in negative ways. And we also want to keep in mind that our kids often want to be in charge, and at times that's super okay. We even want to encourage it, right? But we still need to set that limit and state those boundaries. So, while preparing this presentation, my now 11-year-old daughter was baking up a storm in the kitchen, which is great. She's really found a passion there, but she also needs to know expectations around cleaning up after herself, which I will hold her account to. And this is ultimately how she learns the skill of responsibility, right? So, our teens want to be out, they want to be hanging out with their friends, they want to be autonomous, they want to develop their own identity, which is great, and it's developmentally very appropriate, but it obviously is not without guidance, right? There needs to be firm limits and boundaries as to how, late you can be out and with whom you can be hanging out with. So children really do thrive with firm boundaries and limits being set for them. And it's really not about, and ideally, it's not about engaging in a power struggle, but rather it gives a sense of safety from which they can explore and experiment and ultimately learn, without this sort of limit setting and boundaries in place, skills just don't develop in the same way, So my 6-year-old is allowed to walk the dog and hold his leash when we're walking together, but she's not permitted to do that without adult supervision, right? Regardless of how convincing she tries to be with me. She wants independence. I want to give it to her, but it needs to be safe and appropriate. And I'm the sturdy, consistent leadership around this. And that's what's going to actually help her to develop those skills around autonomy more readily, right? So as parents and as caregivers, we are ultimately in charge of their well-being, right? So when necessary, we need to be the decision maker. Us having that strong presence and connecting with them consistently and lovingly gives them that security, and it provides a closeness and a containment that will allow for them to thrive. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to pass it back to Kirsten, who's going to talk more about some specific strategies we might want to keep in mind.
Thanks, Janna. So yes, so now how do we respond when things are a bit challenging, like what Janna was talking about, right? If we're seeing a bit more behaviors or communication breakdown, I could say that one of the most important things is to show your love. Treat every interaction as an opportunity to connect with your child, right? Greet them with warm expressions, give eye contact, smile, and encourage honest and open interactions. But now what happens if, like I said, there is kind of a communication breakdown? some lack of trust. This can lead to misunderstandings and strained relationships. So I just want to go over 4 things here that can kind of support this, and they all deal with communication. Because if you really think about it, communication is key, right? That's for even with adults, with not only with our children. So we're just quickly looking at beyond behaviors, our own self-awareness, consistency, and one that's really important for me, language and how we use our language. So behavior is a form of communication, and Janna touched on this just before, but I'm just going to speak a little bit more to it. And what we need to do is look beyond the behaviors that we see, because beneath every behavior, there's a feeling, and beneath each feeling, there is a need. And if we meet that need, rather than focus on the behavior that we're seeing, we start to deal with the cause and not necessarily the behavior or the symptoms that we're seeing, right? So we're really kind of looking for what we call that invisible subtitle. What is going on? What are they really asking for? It's almost like being stress detectives or detectives. We're digging deeper. And some of you may or may not have seen or heard this analogy of the iceberg, right? An iceberg, we only see the tip, and underneath the water, there's a lot more going on. And it's kind of the same thing with certain behaviors that we might see. We only see a little piece of it, but there's so much more going on underneath. And we need to kind of dig deeper to figure out what is that need that they're looking for. And Janna touched on this also, but some of us, we see behavior, right? And it results in some punishment or rewards to try to get compliance from our children. But this doesn't address the underlying reason for the behavior. And it can lead to distrust or the child not feeling like nobody understands what they're going through, because they're communicating the only way they know how. And when it comes to younger children, we have these little bodies dealing with these big emotions, the best that they know how. And as our children grow, they're still big emotions. Their bodies just get a little bit bigger. But as Janna mentioned, they come out in different ways, right? It might be like a little snarky response or like a little snap back at you, that kind of thing. So one way to support and acknowledge our children really is to validate and validate emotions. And so when we validate, we show that we see, we hear, we acknowledge what they are going through. A lot of times we don't listen enough to children, and as adults we talk a lot. It's natural, it's part of who we are. But this can cause frustration or feelings to get worse, right? Strained relationships, like you just don't understand, you're not listening to me, that's not what I'm saying. And we feel as adults that or parents that we are listening, like, but I am listening, but it's just the way we're going about it can make things a bit more challenging. So if we look at the visual here where it says emotion coaching, basically there's some steps that we can go through that guide. And what this does is it also helps children to learn that feelings are normal and all feelings need to be experienced and shouldn't be suppressed, and kind of guides them through. So there's a lot of I statements, and we start by acknowledging something's wrong. So we attend to what we're seeing, right? I see something's up right now. I see something's bugging you. Then we name that emotion. So we put that emotion that the child's experiencing into words, like you look really mad, or you seem disappointed, you seem sad. I think you look a bit upset. And sometimes I find people don't like to give this response or name that emotion because they fear that by giving a name to it, it's going to make it worse, right? Like if they're sad, it'll make them sadder, or angry, it'll make them angrier. But actually the opposite is true, that if a child who hears the words for what they're experiencing, they feel comforted. They feel that someone's acknowledging, or mommy or daddy, or they're acknowledging how I feel. They know what's going on, my inner experience. And then after we validate, right? So like it makes sense that you feel blank because of blank, or it makes sense that you feel sad and disappointed that you failed that test because you studied really hard. And when we validate, we're validating the emotions, but we're not necessarily the behavior that's accompanying them. So we validate feelings, not actions, is what I'm trying to say. So it's okay to feel angry, but it's not okay to hit, right? If that's something we're looking at. I have this clip here that I want to show. It's from Inside Out. If you haven't seen this movie, it's an amazing movie from Disney. It's a few years old now, but this clip just sums up everything I kind of mentioned in a very practical way. So I'll show you and then we'll jump back into it, okay?
Oh, the stuffed animal Hall of Fame! My rocket! Wait, Riley and I were still using that rocket. It still has some song power left. Who's your friend who likes to play? No, you can't take my rocket to the top. Riley and I are going to the moon. Riley can't be done with me.
Hey, it's gonna be okay. We can fix this. We just need to get back to headquarters. Which way to the train station?
I had a whole trip planned for us.
Hey, who's ticklish, huh? Here comes the tickle monster. Hey, Bing Bong, look at this. Oh, here's a fun game. You point to the train station and we all go there. Won't that be fun? Come on, let's go to the train station.
I'm sorry they took your rocket. They took something that you loved. It's gone. Forever.
Sadness. Don't make him feel worse.
Sorry.
It's all I had left of Riley.
I bet you and Riley had great adventures.
Oh, they were wonderful. Once we flew back in time, we had breakfast twice that day.
Sadness.
It sounds amazing. I bet Riley liked it.
Oh, she did. We were best friends.
Yeah, it's sad.
I'm okay now. Come on. The train station is this way.
How did you do that?
I don't know. He was sad, so I listened to what...
Hey!
All right, I will stop it there. But I love that clip, and I've shown it in a few presentations because it really sums it up, right? So, something tragic happened to Bing Bong. He was really upset. It's traumatic for him. He lost something that meant a lot to him, and Joy's coming in and just trying to distract him and say, you know, I'll fix it. Oh, we can just go over here. We'll fix it. Come on, let's go. But he's not going because he's dealing with something deep, an emotion, right? And then so you have sadness that comes over and acknowledges that and validates how he's feeling. It says, yeah, you lost something that meant a lot to you. It's sad, and it's okay to feel sad. And then they kind of work through it and he ends up being okay. I know, you know, in reality, when this happens with children, it doesn't go exactly like that, but making them feel validated how they're feeling, instead of trying to fix things, which as parents, we tend to do that a lot, right? We tend to problem solve or want to fix things for our children and go straight to that kind of reasoning part. But a lot of times it's not necessary. Just the validation is all that's needed. And that's kind of what we mean by that connecting piece also, like what Janna was talking about before, making all those connections. And so basically connection, it starts with listening, acknowledging your child's feelings in different times, showing them that you understand and reassuring them that you are there to help them with whatever they need. Trying to see things from your child's perspective as well, because it might be something that's very simple or meaningless to you, but to your child, it's something very big. Like even in here, Bing Bong's wagon meant a lot to him. To Joy, it didn't mean that much to her. It's just not her thing, right? So we have to kind of look at that too, because sometimes it's really big for our children, and for us, it's not that big. So by listening and empathizing with your child too, you begin to foster that mutual respect and ultimately start building better relationships too. But obviously patience is key too, because they may not want to open up at certain times. And here is where it's really important for you to just be there and give it time. Let them know that you are there when they are ready. Being present and supportive is key. And then once they do open up and then the conversation starts, it's a great time for you to start sharing stories and be open and real, because we can be open and honest and real with our children too, right? About how we feel. If you have the example I think of all the time is if a toddler pulling at your shirt or pulling at, my daughter used to do that to me all the time, and looking at her, instead of saying just stop or you're making me angry, you can be genuine, saying I don't like having my shirt pulled. It's important for kids also to understand how their behaviors affect others. So when we use that kind of language, it also helps with that too. And ultimately, I'm going to talk about self-awareness a lot because it plays a big role. knowing our own triggers too, right? We can't parent if we're not in a good place. So like I said before, we take things more personally, which can make this whole interaction extremely difficult. So how we're feeling makes a big impact on how we respond to things. So self-regulation as parents, it really begins with you, it begins with us. And knowing if our triggers, do we need to take a deep breath? Do we need to walk away for a second? Do we need to come back? And ultimately, if we lose our cool, which will happen as parents, we're all human, it happens even with adults, right? We can then go back and apologize and say what we could do next time. Like, I'm sorry I yelled at that moment. Next time, I should have taken a big breath and walked away. And then it also kind of coaches our children in what to do in different scenarios as well. So if I move to consistency and consistent emotional responses, our children learn emotion regulation skills also from how we react. So if we have a child, let's say, that's yelling or very upset, if we start matching their tone or even going higher than them, our children also don't learn how to identify their own feelings because they're now focused at us yelling back. So you may have heard, right? Like, don't yell over a screaming child. That's what I'm talking about. Because the opposite, if we project calm, we automatically turn that volume down. And this picture is a great picture that kind of sums that up too. If they're in a storm and then they need our calm, if we're calm, then that we co-regulate. That means like we help to guide them through what they're going through, and it automatically just calms everything down. However, again, self-awareness, if we're not okay and we're in our own storm and they're in a storm and we meet each other, it just creates, you can picture a big giant storm where nobody's getting anywhere, right? So we need to kind of be aware of how we are feeling, take a deep breath, maybe slow it down and project that calm to kind of guide through. And our children also form their view of themselves from our reactions, right? So they look to how we react to certain things, and to answer the following questions for themselves too. Who am I? Am I a bad kid? Am I good? I'm being out of control right now. Is this a hard moment? Is this who I am? So if we're projecting that calm and we kind of guide through, it helps with that as well. And ultimately having a consistent response, is key, because if 1 minute we let's say we're matching that yelling and then 1 minute we're calm, it can cause some confusion too. And our children won't know how we are reacting, or they won't know how we will respond to certain scenarios when they come up. And as Janna mentioned before too, having our boundaries and limits, structure, a consistency on a day-to-day basis so children know what is expected. This also helps to build trust with our relationships as well. And ultimately too, being aware of when we're working with this too, our own body language. I wanted to mention too, because sometimes we're saying something, but our body language says something else, right? If we're standing like this, or our eyes might look down. So being aware, because children really pick up on body language too. And then forgiving if something unexpected happens, right? Children will make mistakes, things will happen, but ultimately giving that forgiveness and then guiding and mentoring through and showing that, it's okay to make mistakes. We as adults make mistakes all the time, right? Nobody's perfect. So this brings me to the language piece, which I find is really key, because what we say and how we say it is so important. Language is key. So I'm going to touch on a few points here in my little language is key tree. So the first one, personal space. So respecting personal space. Sometimes children want some time alone, just like adults, we need our space, right? So not forcing upon them if they want to be left alone, because this can also cause a bit more distance. It's about finding the right opportunities. If we're planning an activity to bringing them in, what would you like to do? Joining in their preferred activity. If they're doing a TikTok, joining in a TikTok with them. Looking at where we can find those little opportunities to jump into. Being specific and pointing out positives. Often we're not very specific with our language, and I'll get into that. We often use one word like wait or no. So being really specific. And when I say also point out positives, like I like how you used your words there. I like how you got ready super fast. I like how you made your lunch. Just little things here and there. And trying not to drill with questions also. Like a child that comes home from school. And it's funny because my daughter, I have to remind myself this too, because my daughter is 7 and I want to know about her whole day. So instead of saying, what did you do today? How did you like your lunch? How was gym? It's question, right? And you get that same answer, fine. It was okay. or there's no answer, right? Or just leave me alone, mom, I just got in the door. So we have to be careful of the amount of questions we ask too. But we can change our language a bit of, instead of asking a yes or no question, being more specific, right? So what was the best part of your day? What did you like best about your lunch, or something like that? So it's more of a different type of question, and minimizing them too. Because like I said, too many questions can push someone away. And instead of saying wait, being more specific. And Janna actually gave me this example too. It's like I'm sorry, Janna, I'm speaking for you, but cooking in the kitchen, right, and chopping vegetables, and I think her daughter was calling her in the background, and Janna had to say, instead of saying wait, it was, I'm cutting vegetables right now with a sharp knife. I will be there with you in a minute. So being specific, because if we just say wait, our children don't necessarily know, well, wait for what? What are you doing, right? So being specific, I am doing this, helps with that as well. And then we go into sloth talk. If you think of a sloth, you think of calm, cool, collected, slowing down, right? Sometimes as parents, we need to project our inner sloth. And when I say that, I mean like taking a deep breath, slowing it down, our language. Sometimes we talk fast. I tend to talk fast. I have to project my inner sloth sometimes. And slowing down our voice, right? So again, that self-awareness of slowing down our voice and speaking slowly so they understand what we are saying. I don't want to do it now because I'm trying to be mindful of the time as well, but you get what I'm trying to say. There's another one of changing if to when, and to be honest, I heard this somewhere and I can't remember where I heard it, but it really kind of stuck with me. Quite often we'll say, if you don't get ready now, no TV, or if you don't eat supper, no dessert. But if we change that if to a when, it closes those doors for a battle, because the if is like opening the door for an argument or power struggles, right? That tug of war of the battle, who's going to win this statement. So if we switch our language to, for example, if you don't eat supper, no dessert, to when you are done eating dinner, then you can have dessert. Or if you don't do homework, no TV, versus when you finish your homework, then you can get TV. It changes a little bit there. And the other thing that kind of fits in there is avoiding no, because no is another word that can open up a power struggle, right? So instead we can say, I hear what you would like, but we're not having cookies for dinner. So first example that popped in my head, because did you know, and I have a fact here, that the average toddler, I know I'm going younger here, but the average toddler hears the word no about 400 times a day. It's crazy, right? Because we're trying to train, so it's just no, and we as parents, that's what we do. But the problem with just saying the word no is that if it's used too often, children tend to tune it out, and no also doesn't help the child learn to do what to do instead, right? So we just have to try to rephrase our requests in a bit of a more positive way, and be very specific with language. And this leads me to declarative language. So Linda K. Murphy is a speech and language pathologist who came up with, or has this book, it's in the corner, the Declarative Language Handbook. And she talks about the difference between imperative language and declarative language. So simply put, imperative language is a sentence or a question that requires a response. And the response is either correct or incorrect. So for example, say hi to grandma, look at me when I'm talking to you, what did you do at school today? It can also be an action, right? So it's something that has to be done or not done. Whereas declarative language is very different in that it doesn't require a response from the other person. The purpose of declarative language is to share information. So it invites the child to engage on their own terms. So for example, there's no correct or incorrect response. So it might be, instead of saying hi to grandma, you would say, oh, grandma said hi, and then you wait for the child to go say hi. Or I wonder if you need help cleaning your room. I'm not sure you heard me. Or I love that movie. My favorite part was. So always kind of being descriptive, right? We're speaking about kind of what's going around. And these moments build resiliency, flexibility, and positive relationships over time as well. And another, it's useful also because it allows our children also to hear our thoughts, right? And kind of let them know what we're thinking. And it helps them to regulate their own emotions as well, encourages curiosity and problem solving on their end. So when the interaction relies mostly on imperative language, the opposite, when we're asking all those questions, it's kind of like a job interview, right? There's a right or a wrong answer, or a right or a wrong action. And it can be a bit tiring. It doesn't feel like a two-way street. Whereas if we're switching that to the declarative language, it's a more of an equal dynamic, which means the interaction can be shared between two people. It's not one-sided, and it kind of builds more the relationships, right? But I do want to point out that as parents, obviously we will be using imperative language if it's 7, early in the morning and you got to run out the door and it's like, what are your shoes? I need you to get your shoes on, right? It's going to happen, but it's just ultimately, we won't have that two-person conversation going back and forth if you're constantly using that type of language. So we try to use declarative language as much as possible. So some examples I have here too. So instead of what should you do? Oh, I think it's a good time to, or instead of put your shoes on. Oh, I noticed you don't have your shoes, or, oh, we need shoes to go to the park. Instead of wash your hands. Your hands look dirty, or I think you touched a lot of stuff today, and letting them kind of problem solve as well. So before we end this, just to kind of sum up what I just spoke about here, responding when things are challenging, some points here. There's other ways as well to help build these positive relationships, and Janna touched on them too, about being available and distraction free is one of the number ones for me as well too, because like I said at the beginning, we're so bombarded, our plates are full, we have so many things going on. So just setting aside even 10 minutes a day where you put your phone away, you put your laptop or whatever away, and you spend some quality time, because children need to know that they're a priority in our lives, despite all these distractions and stressors that we do have. And then taking genuine interest in their activities and interests, or including them in your own activities too, cooking, grocery shopping, etc. And if you have more than one child, I would say too, to make a point of spending some individual time with each of them, because it can build up their self-esteem, to let them know that they're special and valued. And it's important to celebrate each child for their differences, right? And what they bring to the family. And lastly, I just want to say, ultimately have fun. I find so often we forget to have fun in little moments, and the little moments pass us by so quickly, and our children grow so quickly. When I think about my daughter, how she's 7, it blows my mind, because just yesterday, I swear she was a baby. So just have fun in those little moments too, and where you're caught off guard, or if something spills or something silly happens, join in the moment, kind of channel your inner child, and enjoy all the moments. So on that note, just want to say thank you for being here today, and I guess we'll leave it open now to answer some questions. I'll stop sharing.
Great, thank you very much. A wonderful presentation and lots of great information. Just a note to say that we got some really validating comments in the chat as well. So I invite people joining us to write any questions they might have in the chat. I'm going to start though with a question that we received when people registered. I'll start with the question, how do you stay positive and connect to your children when they're being disrespectful or aggressive? So I was wondering if you could offer any insight around that, or get back.
Yeah, that's hard, right? When our kids are being disrespectful or even aggressive, we can expect to become triggered ourselves, right? So, for me, it's maybe less about being positive in those moments as it's about maintaining our own self-regulation. I can speak for myself that when that's happening, I really have to work hard on me in that moment. And it's almost in a way, first and foremost, right? If I become dysregulated and match that dysregulation, as Kirsten spoke to, it rarely ends well, right? So I think it's about maintaining our calm. And Kirsten's talked about the sloth talk, or I've often talked also with parents about turning ourselves into like a robot sense, which sounds cold and informal, but really what we're doing, it's a self-regulation strategy for us, right? When I'm starting to feel triggered, but I can slow myself down and I can just repeat, without a lot of emotion, or I can slow that talk down, go slow, half speed, half volume. It keeps me regulated. And in turn, it actually helps to regulate our kids and helps to pull them out of that quicker. If someone's being aggressive, right, and it's unsafe, we need to stop that, right? Like that's not something we can often sort of wait around or give a lot of space to, you know, if a child's hurting another child or they're trying to hurt us. But if we're getting into those sort of battles, we want to diffuse by first diffusing ourselves and repeating what our expectation is. I see that you're upset right now. That's okay. You can't use hard words with me. And we might need to just use that tone, and we might need to repeat it a few times, and we can always come back to it after, right? We're not teaching in these moments, right? We're just trying to diffuse and help co-regulate our kids in these moments so that we can get to a place later where we can actually, you know, do some learning and unpack what happened.
Yep, exactly. I have not much to add to that. It's just to being open and honest too about how you're feeling in that moment too. Like those words that you used hurt me. I feel upset, or, you know, letting them know too, but exactly what Janna mentioned. Yeah.
I would just add on to that, because I'm seeing, and I think it relates to this question, Ben, if I can, Ingrid writes, how do you remain patient when your child ignores you? You know, it's similarly like what we're saying. And for me, sometimes, and Kirsten mentioned it, to be able to talk about what this is doing for us, you know, in that sloth talk, in that robotic way, I've asked you now for the 5th time to brush your teeth, and this is making me very frustrated. I need you to do what I'm asking you to do right now. You know, we're letting them know the impact that it's having. I'm getting more impatient by asking a 5th time. And it's okay to say that to our children instead of just repeating ourselves and becoming more and more frustrated as we go.
And sometimes too, giving that wait time. Like I know sometimes we'll ask something like, go brush your teeth. And if it's not done right away that second, within 2 seconds, go brush your teeth. So it's about kind of giving that wait time too a little bit to see if they're going to do it. Because if we start asking constant repeating, then it's more case of someone might ignore or choose to not do it because, oh, you're asking me too many times. Like I've heard you once, but kind of waiting a little bit to see what will happen.
That's a good point. I'm very guilty of that. I'm very guilty of, like, I said it now and I expect you to jump and run and do it, which is not realistic. And then I get irritated that it's not happening because I've just said for it to happen. So thank you, Kirsten. It's good to remind ourselves to give it a moment, right, before we make the next request.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm looking at one of the questions that we received previous ahead of time. And in fact, there's a few here. It's asking about dealing with sibling rivalry. Do you have any advice on the conflict that comes with sibling rivalry, aggressive behavior, and keeping relationships strong with the different children?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I can jump into that if you want. I have 3 children, so it's something I live on a daily basis. And it's hard. The bottom line is it's hard, you know. My 3 kids are all very different and they interact very differently between each other. And some of their relationships are stronger than others, depending on the pairing. You know, I know it sounds like a broken record, but for me, it is really about trying to maintain my composure when things aren't going well between them. And there's a level of expectation around that, right? There is a normal developmental piece that comes with siblings and rivalry and conflict. For me, it's about de-escalating it as best we can in the moment while remaining calm, but being able to go back to it later. And I think that's something that I've learned as a parent. Is we call it like playing the tape to the end. It's not enough to just diffuse and send them to their corners, you know, to their respective corners of the ring. How do we come back to this at a later time when kids are calm and we can actually say, like, what's going on, guys? This has been really difficult lately. And I'm noticing that, you know, you're really at each other. We need to figure out a better way, and to be able to sit and try to hear each other out. Maybe that's separately at first. Maybe eventually that's together. But I think sometimes we're just satisfied when it's over and we're just kind of like, phew, they're not fighting for the moment, it's done. But I think sometimes we need to help nurture that relationship between the 2 or 3 or however many you have. It doesn't necessarily come naturally. They really need that sort of that mediation, you know, from a parent when the storm has passed.
And that's a good point, when the storm has passed, because sometimes we try to jump in too soon and it's not easy. I thank you for answering that. I'm an only child, and I only have one child, so I don't have any siblings, any experience with that. But I would say also in terms of for the relationship piece with the parents too, like I said, mentioned spending some time one-on-one with each child too, to show that they're important, like I had mentioned before, can help with that relationship with the parents.
And very briefly, there's a follow-up question asking kind of what is normal when it relates to sibling rivalry? What is your understanding around that or insight?
That's a really good question. I think we do have to be careful, right? There's a level, what's normal. I know that my oldest and my middle do not get along as well as my oldest and my youngest, or my middle and my youngest. I would like that to be different, but knowing their personalities and how they interact, they're still, I get where it's coming from. Like I see both sides of the coin in the grievance, but I think we also have to be careful, because if people are constantly, or children, our kids are constantly being emotionally injured or physically injured by their sibling, then this needs to be mitigated, right? This leaves the sort of realm of normal and can almost become, harmful, or there can be like some emotional fallout to that, right? So, it's hard for me to pinpoint what's normal and what's not normal within your own context of your family. But if you have a feeling that this is going too far, that this is causing distress, it's causing undue, tension that's long standing, and we're almost never in a good space, we're constantly in this difficult space, then I would suggest that that's veering towards, an intervention needed to sort of help quell that peace between our kids. Yeah.
Thank you. There's a question here from the chat. What is your advice if you notice that your preteen child is starting to lie, starts lying? Strategies.
Do you want,
Want to go ahead, Kirsten?
Oh no, I have a few like thoughts and about that, because I mean, lying, sometimes it depends, right? Lying is when not necessarily just trying not to get out of trouble, or trying, maybe there's like scared of what the response will be from the parents, right? Like I have a few questions to kind of go with that question. I don't know what you were going to say, Janna, but in my experience, like lying, there's a bit of a, I don't want to say a fear, but a bit of they're cautious of what's going to happen if I do say the truth. So kind of working on that relationship in that sense too, showing, being consistent with how we respond in certain aspects or certain situations too. Do you want to continue with that, Janna?
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think whether, in a way, whether it's a preteen or a child or a teenager, I think it begs the question, what's driving this? What are they lying about? And why are they doing that? There is something very developmentally normal about lying, right? It serves a purpose, right? There's something that's sort of adaptive in our ability to sort of skirt the truth sometimes. So, I'd be curious to understand, why is it that you feel that you need to do that? Is it because you are doing something that I very much disapprove of? Yeah. And in that case, we need to reassert some of those boundaries and limitations, perhaps on the expectations we have of our kids. But sometimes the reasons they do it aren't for what we think. It might be out of, like Kirsten said, this sort of fear that we'll be disappointed, uncertain of our response. So I think, it does take some investigation as to like what's driving this behavior. If we think of the iceberg, if we just look at lying is bad and we don't want this, but we want to explore like what's behind this behavior. Why do they feel the need to go down this road? And also know that there is a normal developmental aspect, to engaging in this type of behavior.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's very important to hear, that this is a normal part of growing up. There's a question here that states, my tween daughter sometimes shuts down and replies with simply, I don't know, etc. How can I reach her in those moments?
So, I mean, that's where, for me, in my mind, declarative language comes out, or even that kind of emotion coaching, right? Like, I see something's bothering you. I see you're upset. And if she doesn't want to open up, then just letting her know that you are there. I am here. I will be here when you feel like talking, or when you feel like discussing with me. And again, instead of asking questions, right, more of that declarative language, switching the language we use, and not asking too many questions, and pushing away a bit. That's what comes to mind for that. But it can be difficult. It can be very challenging as our kids get older. I'm sure, Janna, you've experienced that too.
Well, yeah, I have, and I do, and can you just repeat the question, Beck? Because there was a word I wanted to make sure I got right.
Sure. My tween daughter sometimes shuts down and replies with a simple, I don't know, etc. So how can I reach her in those moments?
Right. It's the reach her in those moments. That was what I was looking for. Sometimes you can't, right? Sometimes you really can't reach them in that moment. And I think part of the error I have made many times, and still do, is the insisting. Like, our insistence sometimes, or the way that we're coming at it, causes our kids to shut down more and more, right? They're asking us for space. And it's in our nature to either want to fix or help or save. And we think that's what we're doing by, kind of insisting or requiring an engagement in that time. And sometimes there's really not much for us to do, like Kirsten said, other than to maybe say, I can see you don't really want to talk right now, but you can talk to me when you're ready. And sometimes it is about going back. I've discovered the times where my child is more accessible. And it's often, at bedtime, even my 11-year-old, as she's getting ready for bed and getting tucked in, there's a vulnerability to her then that allows her, or seems to allow her, to let me in, or be more close, or be more open. When she was younger, it was the bathtub. It was like, come and talk to me while I'm in the bathtub. That's changing, and that's okay. But it's about like reading the temperature and the volume, and giving the space where space is needed, and letting them know that we're there when they need us, and coming back at a time that they might just be more receptive then.
Yeah. Thank you. I think we have time for just one or two more questions. This question from the chat states, how to motivate a teenager, one who's not wanting to do the work, for example, homework assigned to him. So, thoughts? Motivating teenagers.
Yeah, that's difficult in of itself. For me, I have other questions too. Is the work too difficult? Is there something there that he or she might find challenging, and that so doesn't want to engage, doesn't want to start? Is there something else on the mind? It kind of leads me to think again about digging deeper, right? That whole digging deeper. What is causing this? What is going on? And again, not finding out by drilling with questions, but just kind of here and there asking, saying, like, I see that you're, not wanting to do your homework. What's up? Can I help you with something? Yeah. Motivating teenager. I mean, it's different for every teenager. Every scenario will be different. But when I think of homework and I see work, I think, is it possibly it's too hard or not challenging enough? Either or, right? It can be either one. Yeah. And I'm just going to ask the last question because I think it resonates with a lot of people. There's a question around helping children with high anxiety. I wonder if you have any advice or strategies for parents who have children who are anxious.
That's a really good question, and there's a lot packed into that. I can, I always like to draw on some of my own experiences, and my middle guy had an anxious start to the school year, and it was kind of heightened. It was like a bit more than I had experienced before. And I found what was helpful was, part of what Kirsten was saying about that emotion coaching, right? Is coming alongside of them and just being present. I wasn't fixing it for him. His anxieties were real, and they were true to him. And me trying to fix and use language that like, it's going to be okay, to stop worrying. It's not that big a deal. This did not help. This was not helpful. It was not comforting. For me, it was, really validating. I can see that this is hard for you. I can see that starting grade 3 this year has been really hard. what do I need to know? Like sometimes it really is about, I think, taking a step back and letting them tell us and letting them lead the way. I think we can stumble around these things when we're constantly trying to fix, when there's not always a fix, to certain things. You've got peers that are leaving you out, or you're feeling kind of, you lost your best friend and they're moved on to somebody else, and this is causing a lot of nervousness to go to school and find your new peer group. There's a strength in just recognizing that must be really hard, and then we can, once we validate and a child feels that they're being heard and we're not just trying to gloss over this or find a quick fix, we can dive into like what would be helpful. Like let's think about this together. Let's think about what if tomorrow was slightly better than today, what would be happening to make that possible? And we're just moving in these little incremental steps. We're not taking anxiety off the table, but maybe there's something we can tap into that will help guide them to a strategy that will be slightly better than previously.
Yeah.
Thank you, Janna and Kirsten. We have now reached just after 8 o'clock. And I want to thank both of you for sharing your expertise and your insight into these really important topics for parents. A quick reminder that if you visit the Learn website, there are recordings of other webinars that the Center for Excellence for Mental Health have hosted, including issues around anxiety and other strategies, which are really wonderful. So with that, I posted in the link a brochure for future webinars that are coming up over the next few weeks. I invite you to join us. Please spread the word. And with that, I'd like to thank all the parents who have joined us. So please do take the words of Janna and Kirsten to heart. And thank you very much for sharing your knowledge.
Thanks, guys, for being here.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.